Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and for this video we're going to be looking at the 1990s and how it was the decade for underrated horror movies. So the 1990s, I always feel it was an underrated decade in general. It's often cited as being the worst decade for horror movies, but personally I don't think that was true. I think it was always going to be a hard act to follow the 1980s because the 80s was just an amazing time for horror movies. When you look at the creatures and the effects and the concepts, the 1980s is probably the best. So it was always going to be hard to follow that. But the 1990s, during that time, we got some really excellent movies. I'll put some of them across the screen now so you can see what I'm talking about, and I will cover some of these movies in detail one day. But when you look back, we really did get some absolutely fantastic heavy-hitting movies in the 1990s. But also, there was some other kind of movies that were just as good, but kind of went under the radar a little bit. So I'm going to talk about more of these kind of obscure ones. So I've got 13 films here. I'm looking for some. I've got 13 films here from the 1990s that I think are underrated and don't really get a lot of mentions and don't get the credit that they deserve. So we'll get into this. This is the 1990s and some of the most underrated movies from that decade. So we'll make our way through the 1990s decade. And starting in 1990, we have a film that I must admit, I've not heard of this movie until it was released on Blu-ray. And the movie is Blood Games. And this film sees a women's team of sort of like softball or rounders, whatever you want to call it. And they're in this team and they're going around the country doing pretty well for themselves. And they're in this sort of game in sort of like this rural backwoods area. And they end up beating the men who kind of do nothing but sort of make fun of them and quite lecherous and that kind of thing. They end up beating them, which doesn't go down well at all. And some of the guys take it upon themselves to take revenge. And the women's bus breaks down and things just get out of hand. A few deaths occur. And it descends into this team of women have to try to get through the wilderness and surviving being stalked and killed off by these backwoods men that have completely lost their minds, and it's all gone out of control. But it's a really good movie, and it's one of these like sort of like high tension survival in the woods kind of movie with this group of women trying to make it out alive, and they have to sort of turn to their inner primitive skills and things like that. And it's really cool. So it's kind of, I put it in the same camp of things like Deliverance and Rituals and Hunter's Blood. I've talked about these kind of movies before. They all kind of go under the radar, but they're really good. And Blood Games is a good example of that. But this time you've got a bunch of women trying to fight off these weirdo guys. But as I say, really cool movie. One that you don't hear about much. It was released by Vinegar Syndrome and sort of kind of came and went. But I had a great time watching it. Probably one of the best movies that Vinegar Syndrome have released, I will say. So if you can still find yourself a copy of Blood Games, it's a really awesome movie, great early 90s film, and another great example of this kind of survival in the woods. And you really are rooting for these ladies as well. So first up on the list of underrated 90s films is Blood Games. Sticking in 1990, we have Clive Barker's Nightbreed, which is such an awesome movie, great concept, and I love what they did with it. So this movie sees Craig Sheffer, he plays a guy called Boone, and he's not in a great place. He's having like appointments with his therapist and that, and it turns out there's kind of a killer going around killing people as well. Now, I'm not giving anything away, but it turns out the killer, played randomly by David Cronenberg, is his therapist. And it all gets framed on Boone, and he ends up going on the run and falls into the subterranean world of these monsters and creatures that are the Nightbreed. And his kind of presence in there opens the world up a bit more, and it sort of exposes them to the human world, and they have to fight for this monster realm that they live in. It's as awesome as it sounds. It's really cool, and the monster effects in this are fantastic. Nightbreed really doesn't get as much credit as it should for the great special effects and monster makeups that are all on array in this film. There's a lot of different looking creatures. They really go quite imaginative with how these creatures and inhabitants look. And yeah, it's just awesome. Craig Sheffer's really good in it, and it gets quite sort of action packed towards the end as they fight for this monster realm. And it's just an awesome film. It's one that I've not seen for a long time, but it's a great movie. And I know that Rob from the Wacky World Lounge would never forgive me if I left this off an underrated 90s list. So there you go, Rob. I will include this for you. But yeah, everyone should check out Nightbreed. It's totally awesome and a great one from the 90s. Still in 1990, we have The Exorcist 3, which is an excellent sequel to The Exorcist. Don't be put off by this being the third one in the series. This is a great movie and a highly original kind of concept and story that it tells. So this one, we see George C. Scott. He's a police detective, and there's a killer going round that is replicating the work of this infamous Gemini killer. But the trouble is, the Gemini killer was put to death several years before. He got sent to the electric chair, so he is kind of dead. In the meantime, this sort of mental patient, played by Brad Dourif, emerges onto the scene, who claims to sort of be the Gemini killer, and he even has sort of intimate details of the crimes. He knows about this stuff, which really kind of adds to the notion that he could well be the Gemini killer. So it's all kind of weird and bizarre and supernatural, and George C. Scott has to kind of get to the bottom of this. But Exorcist 3 is an interesting one. It was very much kind of a passion project for William Peter Blatty, and he kind of created his whole vision, and then the studio sort of stepped in and made a lot of changes and a lot of cuts to the movie. Now you get both editions here on this Blu-ray, and you would think that the director's cuts is the one to go for. Personally, I much prefer the studio edited version. It's one of the few examples where the studio stepped in and made it a bit better. They condensed it down a bit, and it flows a bit better, and I found the whole thing a bit more cohesive to watch. But in general, The Exorcist 3 is an excellent movie. It plays out really well. George C. Scott is awesome in it. He has a friend in the movie who's either a doctor or something like that, another professional who's also sort of like quite an elderly guy. And the friendship they have in Exorcist 3 is a real joy to watch. They feel like they are kind of really long time friends that just come together to put the world to rights. They have some great scenes together. Brad Dourif is awesome as maybe the Gemini killer, maybe not. And Jason Miller comes back in this third one as well. And there's some really cool scenes between like Brad Dourif and George C. Scott. And as I say, just a really intriguing and creepy story to this. It's a really good movie. So if you've not seen Exorcist 3, definitely check it out. It is one of the most underrated films in my opinion. So yeah, definitely one that's worth watching. Next up we go to 1992 with the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So if you're only familiar with the Sarah Michelle Gellar Buffy, which is awesome, there is a movie that came before that, and it's a lot of fun, and it's like really 90s. Like Nightbreed, it's one that I haven't watched for a while, but I really wanted to include it on this list because although I don't remember a great deal from it, I just remember having so much fun watching the original Buffy. So in this movie, she is a regular girl. She's like a popular cheerleader girl in high school, of course, because it's the 90s. And she finds out that she's kind of next in line to be this vampire hunter. And I think that Donald Sutherland is her mentor throughout all of this. And it's just a really cool and really fun film. It's one that I actually do want to watch again because I know it's a really enjoyable one. I wanted to watch it for this video, but I didn't have enough time. But in terms of like fun, light 90s horror movies, definitely check out the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's definitely worth a watch. And yeah, it's just another really enjoyable one that I wanted to include on the list. Next up, from 1994, we have a movie that I don't think is particularly a masterpiece or anything like that, but is really underrated in what it did, and that is Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the Nightmare on Elm Street sequel. And in this one kind of comes at you with the concept that all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and everything involved in them were kind of real, in the sense that they were real movies and the people that made them were real people. So sort of Wes Craven is in this, Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, and they all play themselves, and they are the actors that were in those films, if that makes sense. And in this one, it's the idea is that Freddy Krueger is actually real, and he's now stalking the people that made those movies. So there's like conversations between Wes Craven and Heather Langenkamp, like, you know, saying it was all a movie and he's not real. They just made a movie based out of him. But Freddy is coming for them for real. So very meta, very self-referential, and I think for its time it's really original. This was before Scream, that kind of took the genre and looked at itself and did all that kind of thing. New Nightmare was already doing it, but a lot more low key, and I think it should get a lot more credit for doing that. Also, they give Freddy Krueger a new look. He's kind of got a long coat on in this one, and his facial features are somewhat different. I think his gloves are a little bit different as well, which was a brave thing to do. And I actually don't mind Freddy's look in this movie. I think it's pretty cool. I can kind of take either looks, really, the one from the earlier movies or this one. It's pretty cool, and it's still got a lot of the cool kind of practical, imaginative death scenes and effects and that kind of thing. And it's pretty awesome as well to see like Robert Englund, who played Freddy, be stalked by Freddy as well. But that was a really really fun concept. So, as I say, not a great movie, not even one of the best Nightmare on Elm Street movies, but the concept in this is fantastic, and I think New Nightmare certainly should get some recognition for how it was brave enough to change things around and introduce that really original concept for the time. Scream kind of came along and sort of took all that credit, but for me, Nightmare on Elm Street did it beforehand and did it just as effectively. On to 1995, and we have Tales from the Crypt's Demon Knight, which is one I always love watching. This used to come on like Sci-Fi Channel late at night, and I always had a blast watching this as a kid and when I was growing up. But this one, we see Billy Zane, who is an awesome actor, underrated actor in himself. He is like this Prince of Darkness kind of demon king, and he's looking for this final sort of amulet key thing, which when he gets it, it'll unleash the powers of evil on Earth. And this group of survivors, sort of led by Jada Pinkett Smith, who is famous now for a lot of wrong reasons, they have to like fend them off and fight against Billy Zane and his demons who want this key. And there's a whole lot of really awesome stuff in this one. Very entertaining movie. Funny, gory, got some great practical effects and demon effects in it. And William Sadler is kind of this sort of guy who sort of knows about it and has to sort of do battle with Billy Zane to sort of banish him back from the darkness. And he has like this sort of serum, this liquid stuff that he can put in the doorway that stops the demons getting through. But yeah, it's awesome. Dick Miller's in it as well. He has a few good moments in this, and there's a really cool ending involving the aforementioned liquid thing on a bus, which I won't give away. But Demon Knight is a really fun film. It's got a bit of everything. It's got scary moments, some, as I say, great effects, and then some laughs along the way, and a really good cast of a lot of underrated people anyway. So yeah, one that I definitely wanted to include. It's one that I always have fun whenever I watch. So yeah, definitely wanted to include this on the list of underrated 90s movies. Next up, we move to 1996 with a seriously underrated movie, and that is Bad Moon. I hardly hear anyone ever talk about this, and it's one of the best werewolf movies I've ever seen. It's about this woman, and she has a young son, and I think it's her brother. He moves back into the area, in like this quiet, sort of idyllic little town, and he moves back into the area in like a camper van, and everything seems alright. It seems pretty alright, but he's got a dark secret that he's actually a werewolf. Not giving anything away, but he's a werewolf. And for a large part of the movie, the only character that is aware of this is the family dog, which is a really awesome German Shepherd. And coming from a family of German Shepherd owners, I thought that was really cute. So yeah, the family dog knows about it, and then the younger son knows about it, and together they have to kind of like stop him and convince people that what's going on. So it's one of those kind of things. But really enjoyable film, awesome looking werewolf in this film, and practical effects, which really make it stand out in kind of the late 90s when they were opting for more CGI. On that note, there was a tiny bit of CGI in this movie. They did actually try it out, and it looks awful, and they didn't go any further with it, which was definitely the right decision. But I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, there's a couple of seconds of it still used in the movie where the werewolf transforms, and it just looks awful alongside the really impressive practical effects. But yeah, as I say, Bad Moon, I hardly hear anyone ever talk about it, and I don't know why. It's an awesome movie anyway, great werewolf film, and a really good example of an underrated 90s movie. Next up, from 1998, we have the awesome Deep Rising. Why this movie was not more well received, I kind of do know. We'll get into that in just a minute. But Deep Rising is an excellent movie. So in this one, we see Treat Williams, who passed away unfortunately a few months ago. Treat Williams and a small team of people with him. They like own this like cargo boat transportation company, and they transport things and people around. And they have a group of shifty, shady looking guys who they are transporting to a certain location. And Treat Williams' kind of mantra in the film is, if the cash is there, we don't care. And even the people that they're ferrying about are like, really? But anyway, he should care a bit more, because the people that are on his boat are actually like armed terrorists. And he's driving them, unbeknownst to him and his team, he's driving them to a luxury cruise liner that's currently on the way to somewhere, and they plan to hijack the cruise ship and then do whatever, rob it or whatever, that kind of thing. But unbeknownst to them, the cruise liner has been attacked and taken over by these serpentine sea monsters. So by the time Treat Williams and these armed terrorists get on board the ocean liner, they find themselves fighting against these cool-looking sea monsters, and they start killing them off one by one. It's a seriously entertaining movie. I absolutely love Deep Rising. Now, I did say, why this wasn't a more successful movie. I believe the problem this had, like a lot of movies, it was released just after Titanic, which of course was one of the biggest grossing movies ever and dominated the box office for a few years. And then any movie that came out after Titanic was always going to struggle. But also Deep Rising was another one that was set on a large ocean liner, so it was always going to be up against it. But it's a real shame, because it's a gem of a film, and it's got some great horror elements, action elements, and also a bit of comedy as well. It's kind of one that takes those kind of the sort of early 90s, like Steven Seagal, Van Damme action scenarios, and just puts it into a horror horror movie as well. So really, really enjoyable film, especially if you're a fan of that kind of mix like I am. So definitely one that's worth watching. I don't actually know how many people have seen it because again, not many people talk about it. I've heard it mentioned a few times, and a few people seem to consider it favourably, but it really doesn't get the recognition that it should do. It's a totally awesome movie. So yeah, when you can, definitely check out Deep Rising. Sticking in 1998, we have one of my favourite movies from the 90s, and that is The Faculty, which is a wonderful mix of kind of like that old 50s kind of paranoia, sort of something coming in and taking over, and then like the hip late 90s high school setting, and it works really, really well. So in this movie, the high schoolers start to uncover this sort of plot that their teachers are in fact aliens. They've been taken over, and they are in turn trying to take over the school body for their own alien means. And a mixture of high schoolers from like kind of the nerds, the jocks, the cool kids, they all have to come together to try and stop this from happening. And it's a really good film, not just like a cool hip 90s movie. It's a really good film directed by Robert Rodriguez. Great cast of kind of like young, fresh, upcoming people. So you've got like Elijah Wood in this, Usher is in it, and then you've got some more kind of sort of established stars in this. You've got Piper Laurie is in it, Robert Patrick is in it, and it's just really awesome. And there's a cool looking monster towards the end that attacks them under the bleachers. And I just like how they do it. I like how they kind of it's subtle to start with, and it's kind of creepy, and things are slowly revealed over the course of the film. They find the aliens have this weakness that I won't get into, but that's all kind of put out there. And it's just put together really, really well. And it's always a film, again, that I just really enjoy. So definitely wanted to include The Faculty on this. So if you want something that's like I say, it has the notions of those old 50s sort of invasion of the body snatcher style films, but puts it in a late 90s high school, which for me is a great combination. So if you think that sounds awesome, definitely check out The Faculty. It's another really underrated 90s movie. Next up from 1999, had to include it, is Deep Blue Sea. It's a film that I really like, but I do think it should get a bit of credit as well, because it's like the first shark movie that came along that didn't try to be Jaws. It has very few Jaws tropes in it, which I think is quite commendable. So there's no sort of like 4th of July thing going on. There's no like three men, one's a policeman, one's an expert, one's a hunter. There's no kind of like mayor or authoritative character saying you can't close the beaches, which like virtually every shark movie or killer animal film had after Jaws. Deep Blue Sea really kind of went in its own direction and did its own thing. So this sort of like underwater research facility where they're experimenting on sharks to try and make sort of medical breakthroughs, and it all goes kind of wrong. They really sort of, I think, set themselves apart from the Jaws framework, and it's still a movie that holds up reasonably well and still looks pretty good. Some of the CGI effects are not great, but there's still moments in it I think that work well and still pack a bit of a punch and surprise you. So things like the Samuel L. Jackson death, of course, is now legendary. Sorry if you haven't seen Deep Blue Sea, but it's been out a long time. So yeah, there's still things that Deep Blue Sea does remarkably well, but still does it within the context of like this kind of cheesy popcorn shark movie. But yeah, one that does kind of manage to do it in a bit more of an original fashion, which I have a lot of respect for it for doing that. So yeah, couldn't do this list without Deep Blue Sea. So yeah, Deep Blue Sea. Next up, also from 1999, we have The Rage, Carrie 2. And I wanted to include this one because this is a movie that I wrote off for years and years. I remember it kind of coming out at the time in 1999 and really didn't think much of it. I just thought it's been way too long since the original Carrie. They can never follow that movie up in an effective way, and this is just going to be a very ineffective cash cow, really. And kind of quickly forgot about the movie and did so for years and years. And in fact, not until it came out on Blu-ray did I give it a second thought. And I sort of thought, well, I might as well pick it up. And I was very pleasantly surprised by how good it is and how the film holds itself up in its own way. It actually has very little to do with the original Carrie movie. It's just a similar story with a girl who has the similar telekinetic powers, but it plays out a bit differently, and it very much has a late 90s feel. It doesn't feel like it's trying to hang on to the old Carrie White movie in any kind of way. Great performance from the leading lady, and it kind of all comes to a head at like this pool party, I think, towards the end, and gets a bit crazy and a bit intense. But yeah, one that I was very surprised when I watched it and kind of thought, I really shouldn't have held off all this long. But yeah, I think maybe it just was kind of a victim of its own sequelness, perhaps, and maybe other people thought that it was unnecessary to have a second Carrie movie. I think if they'd tried to have done a continuation, it really wouldn't have worked. But they really kind of embraced this new story and the late 90s feels and that kind of thing. So yeah, one that I thought was really good. So if you like me and you held off of this movie for years and years, definitely give it a chance, because it is a pretty good one in its own respect. Also from 1999, we have Idle Hands, which, oh my goodness, I just absolutely love this movie. It is so much fun. I can watch it any time, and it always makes me laugh whenever I watch it. This one sees Devon Sawa, and he is like this high schooler who has to fight this demonic severed hand, which goes around the neighborhood, killing people, killing his friends. But then also his friends come back from the dead, and they do so brandishing the injuries that kind of killed them. So there's some pretty cool looking makeup in this one. And I've always looked at Idle Hands as it's American Pie if American Pie was a horror movie. And I love those movies, and love the concept of that, having that kind of vibe but being a horror movie. And yeah, Idle Hands does that and doesn't disappoint. It's an awesome movie, but again, one that I don't hear too many people talk about. I wonder if the balance of Idle Hands didn't do it any favors. So if it was perhaps too much of a horror film for the American Pie teen crowd, but then a bit too much American Pie for the horror fans, I don't know. But as someone that likes both movies, this is a perfect concoction for me, and one that I really enjoy. So yeah, definitely a top recommendation if you're looking for like a horror comedy from the 90s. And the last movie on this list, again from 1999. 1999 was a great year. And it's another movie, I must confess, I haven't watched it for a long time, and I don't remember the details all that well. But when I was looking over the collection and looking over movies, I couldn't leave this one off. And that is Ravenous. And man, this is an awesome movie. I never hear anyone talk about it, so I wanted to give it a little bit of coverage. But this one takes place, I don't know how to say it, like pilgrimage times. I'm sure that's horribly wrong, but really old-fashioned kind of movie, and a bunch of guys, they're out in the like freezing cold wilderness, and it all goes a bit wrong, and they have to resort to like cannibalism. But they sort of like, I think if I remember right, they kind of get a taste for it, and there's a lot of kind of double crossings, and people aren't what you think they are, and a few deaths and that kind of thing. I need to watch it again, but take my word for it, Ravenous is an awesome movie, and you'll be on the edge of your seat with this one, and it really will kind of throw you out there and throw you off and things like that. And there's a great story there. I think also this one's got a bit of humour as well, which works and alleviates a bit of the tension and horrifying concept of people eating people. But yeah, I couldn't do Ravenous. Sorry, I can't remember it as well as I should, but I know it's awesome and no one ever talks about it. So I definitely just wanted to include it here on this video. So there you go, guys. That's just a few underrated horror movies from an underrated decade. Let me know what you think of the movies that I picked. Let me know what movies you like from the 90s. Is there any more movies that are underrated that you feel should get more love? Let me know. So thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more videos.